Though George was gone, his spirit ensured that his family found closure and financial stability. Angela left the courtroom feeling a sense of relief, as though justice had finally been served. But what she didn't know was that the woman who had booked George for that ill-fated ride, the very woman who had sent him to the mansion, was far from innocent. She was, in fact, George's killer's wife, and she had been part of the dark plan all along. As Angela stood in the courtroom, feeling vindicated, the woman sat in the back, her eyes filled with fury. Her husband's conviction shattered her world, and as the sentence of death by hanging was handed down, she wept bitterly. It wasn't just the loss of her husband that tore at her, it was the humiliation. The woman's mind, consumed by rage and revenge, began to plot a dark course. She vowed to make Angela pay for her husband's downfall. With the bitterness of losing her husband to justice fueling her every thought, she began to devise a way to get back at the woman who had unknowingly torn her world apart. Meanwhile, Angela's life, though still marked by the sorrow of losing George, was beginning to stabilize. The financial windfall she had received from her husband's killer's confession allowed her to provide her children with a better future. She enrolled them in the best schools and moved them to a safer, more comfortable neighborhood. Though the pain of George's death never fully went away, Angela found solace in the new opportunities life was offering her. She didn't squander the money. Instead, she lived frugally, choosing to invest in her children's education and future. Her focus was on ensuring they never had to experience the struggles she had faced. She was careful with every penny, making sure her newfound wealth would last. But as she settled into this new chapter, she had no idea that lurking in the shadows was a vengeful woman, determined to destroy everything Angela had worked for. George watched helplessly from the spirit world as Angela's life slowly moved forward. He could see the danger that lurked around her, the vengeful woman watching from the shadows. But no matter how hard he tried to communicate, Angela couldn't see or hear him. It frustrated him beyond words. He whispered warnings in her ear, stood beside her as she slept, and even tried to write messages in the condensation on the bathroom mirror. But nothing worked. Unlike the man who had taken his life, Angela wasn't haunted by guilt or darkness, and that made it nearly impossible for George to reach her. He watched helplessly from the spirit world, his presence lingering like a shadow over his family. He saw the woman, his killer's wife, watching Angela from afar, her eyes cold and calculating. George tried to call out to Angela, but his voice was nothing more than a whisper lost to the wind. "Angela, she's dangerous. Please don't trust her," George pleaded as he stood next to her one evening while she tucked the children into bed. Angela sat by her daughter's side, brushing her hair gently. She hummed softly, completely unaware of George's voice or the weight of his spirit lingering by her side. "George, I wish you were here," she whispered to herself. George knelt beside her, reaching out to touch her face, but his hand passed through her like smoke. Frustration grew in his chest. He had to find a way to warn her, but how? Days passed, and Angela carried on with life, gradually stepping back into the world, attending school meetings, running errands, and occasionally sitting by George's grave to talk to him in silence. But as peaceful as her days appeared, George could feel the tension building around her. One afternoon, as Angela waited in her car outside the school to pick up her children, a man approached with a warm smile. Tall, well-dressed and confident, he exuded charm. "Excuse me, Ma'am," he said, tapping on her window. Angela looked up, startled at first, but then rolled the window down slightly. "Yes. I couldn't help but notice your car. It's a beautiful model. I have one just like it," he said with a friendly grin. Angela chuckled softly. "Oh, really? Small world. I'm David," he extended his hand. "My son goes to the same school. I've seen you around." Angela hesitated briefly, but then shook his hand. "Angela, nice to meet you." From a distance, George watched carefully. There was something about this man that felt off. His charm seemed too polished, too rehearsed. "I don't like this," George muttered, pacing beside the car. "Angela, don't let him in." But Angela didn't hear him. David leaned against the car, continuing to chat casually. "It's not easy doing this alone, is it?" Referring to the loss of her husband, a topic that came up during the conversation. Angela's smile faded just a little, but she nodded. "No, it's not. But you find a way to keep moving." George stepped forward, trying again. "Angela, listen to me. Look at his eyes. He's too smooth. There's something wrong with him. Maybe we could get some coffee sometime," David suggested, his eyes flickering with a hint of something beneath the charm. Angela hesitated. I don't really have time these days." "Oh, just as friends," David added quickly. "No pressure." Before Angela could respond, her children came running toward the car. "Mommy," they called out, waving excitedly. David smiled at them. "Beautiful kids, you must be proud." Angela nodded, unlocking the car. "I am. It was nice meeting you, David." As she drove off, George stood in the street, watching David with narrowed eyes. David's smile faded the moment Angela's car disappeared around the corner. His expression grew cold, and without a word, he turned and walked briskly toward another car parked nearby. George followed, materializing in the passenger seat of David's vehicle. He stared hard at David, anger simmering in his chest. "Who are you, really?" George demanded, knowing full well David couldn't hear him. David sat silently for a few moments before pulling out his phone. "She took the bait," he muttered, dialing a number. "I'll keep getting close. She won't see it coming." George's spirit tensed. "I knew it," he growled. That night, Angela sat by the fireplace, sipping tea while her children played nearby. George stood at the edge of the room, watching, feeling the weight of the secret he couldn't share. "I need to stop him," George whispered to himself. "But how?" A sudden thought struck him. Angela couldn't hear him, but there was one person who might. His daughter. George knelt by her as she played with her dolls. He gently whispered into her ear. "Jasmine, Daddy needs you to listen," George whispered softly, his spirit barely able to make the words clear. His daughter's small face brightened as she listened intently, her doll forgotten in her hands. "Tell Mummy, she is in trouble," George urged. "She needs to be careful of David." Jasmine's eyes widened, and without hesitation she sprang to her feet. Her little feet padded quickly as she ran to the living room, where Angela was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. "Mummy, Mummy," Jasmine called, her voice full of urgency. She tugged at Angela's sleeve, her face serious. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Angela asked, lowering the magazine and looking at her daughter with a warm, though tired smile. "Daddy says you're in trouble," Jasmine exclaimed. "He says you need to be careful of David." Angela's face faltered for a moment. She blinked, unsure of how to react. "Jasmine, sweetie, what are you talking about?" Angela said softly, brushing her daughter's hair back. "Your daddy's gone. He can't talk to you." Jasmine's brow furrowed, confusion clouding her small face. "But he did, Mummy. I heard him." Angela sighed, sitting back into the couch. She had been expecting something like this. It wasn't unusual for children to go through phases where they imagined their loved ones speaking to them after they'd passed. "Jasmine," Angela began gently, "I know you miss Daddy, but he's not here anymore. It's just your imagination, okay? There's nothing to worry about." "Okay, Mummy," she said. George, watching this unfold from the spirit world, felt the sorrow of being so close to his family, yet unable to protect them. His anger flared, and his frustration turned to desperation. He couldn't reach Angela, not directly, but he wasn't about to give up. He just had to find another way. As days passed, Angela, unaware of the looming danger, continued to see more of David. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Simple conversations, friendly exchanges. But over time, David became a more regular presence in her life. He offered to help with errands, school runs, and even fixing things around the house. His charm never wavered, and slowly Angela allowed him into her life, seeing him as a confidant, someone who understood her struggles. She was beginning to like him, and slowly she began to discuss the money she had received from the settlement. David seemed smart, business-savvy, and comfortable discussing financial matters. Angela, still adjusting to the new wealth in her life, felt a sense of relief in talking to someone who appeared to have the knowledge to help her manage it wisely. "Have you thought about investing the money, Angela?" David asked one evening as they sat in the living room of her home, sipping coffee. "A wealth management company could help you set up an investment portfolio, grow the funds, and ensure financial security for you and your children." Angela smiled, relieved to have someone who seemed to understand her financial situation. "I've thought about it, but I'm not really sure who to trust, you know?" David leaned in, his voice soft and reassuring. "Trust me, I've been working with this company for years. They're reputable, and they'll take good care of your investment. You've been through so much, Angela, and you deserve peace of mind." As the days passed, David continued to reassure her, presenting the wealth management company as a legitimate and promising opportunity. But all the while, his real intentions remained hidden. It was a scam, a carefully planned scheme to take advantage of Angela's grief and vulnerability and siphon off her newfound wealth. George watched from beyond, feeling an overwhelming sense of helplessness and anger as David manipulated Angela into beginning the process of signing documents that would transfer the money. George's spirit seethed with rage. On the night of the final deal, when Angela was scheduled to sign the contract and send the money to the supposed wealth management company, George's anger reached its boiling point. He would not let David steal from his family. No, not this time. As the paperwork lay on the table in front of Angela, ready for her signature, George appeared in the room, a shadow of fury in the corner of her eye. Without warning, a crackling sound echoed through the room. A heavy whip materialized in George's spectral hands, and he swung it down with force. The lash echoed like thunder through the room. David yelped in shock as the whip struck him. The room filled with a ghostly energy, the crack of the whip growing louder with every strike. David recoiled in terror, his eyes wide with disbelief. What is happening?" he shouted, stumbling back in panic. The invisible whip continued to lash at him, each strike more intense than the last. David's fear deepened, his face pale with fright. He stumbled backwards, his legs tripping over the rug, and he turned toward the door, desperate to escape. No, I'm leaving, David screamed, his voice high-pitched with panic. He bolted for the door, slamming it behind him as he ran into the night. Angela stood frozen, wide-eyed and speechless, watching the scene unfold. She had heard nothing, seen nothing, but felt the oppressive energy in the room, the sense of something powerful and vengeful that had just made its presence known. She shook her head, trying to process what had just happened. What on earth had just occurred? She was still shaken but managed to drive back to the house, still unsure whether she'd imagined everything. But as she walked in, her daughter Jasmine, who had been in her room, came rushing toward her. Mummy, Jasmine exclaimed, her little face full of urgency. Daddy told me to tell you that he was the one who flogged David and made him run away. Angela froze. Her heart skipped a beat and a chill ran through her spine. How could Jasmine know that? How could she have known? What did you say, sweetie? Angela asked, kneeling down to her daughter's level, her voice trembling. Jasmine looked up at her mother with serious eyes. Daddy told me. He said he was the one who flogged David so he would run away. Angela's breath caught in her throat. She blinked rapidly, her mind racing. But how did you hear him, darling? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Jasmine looked up, wide-eyed. He's always talking to me, Mummy. He says he's with us, watching over us. He wants to protect us. And he told me to tell you that he made David run away. Angela's heart pounded in her chest. It was impossible, she thought, but looking into her daughter's innocent face, she couldn't deny it any longer. There was no way Jasmine could have known about what had just happened, unless it was true. The pieces started falling into place, and Angela's fear began to turn into realization. George, even after death, had been protecting her. His love and spirit had not left them. Angela reached for her daughter, pulling her close. Oh, my darling, I believe you, she whispered through tears. I believe you. At that moment, Angela knew with every fiber of her being that her husband's love had never truly left. He was still there, watching over them, guiding them, even from the other side. Through their daughter, George eventually told Angela what transpired that night and the role he played in bringing his killer to justice. It was Jasmine who, once again, became the bridge between the living and the dead. Daddy says I should tell you everything, Mummy. He says you need to know about David and his plan. Angela's heart tightened. She had known something wasn't right with David, but hearing Jasmine speak these words as if they were coming straight from George's spirit made the truth feel even more unsettling. Jasmine continued, Daddy says David was the brother of the woman whose husband killed him. She was behind everything. She wanted to take the money you got, Mummy. She wanted to hurt you and hurt us. Angela felt a chill run down her spine. She had always suspected there was more to David than met the eye, but the realization that he had been connected to her husband's killer and that his intentions had been to harm her and their children hit her like a bolt of lightning. She sat down slowly, trying to process what her daughter was saying. Jasmine, are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling. Jasmine nodded. Daddy says you're not safe here. He says you should leave the city. Go somewhere far away where you and the kids can start fresh. He said to me, Jasmine said. Angela's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just about moving on from the past. It was about survival. George, even from the afterlife, wanted to protect them, wanted them to be free from the shadows of the danger that had haunted their lives. Leave, Angela repeated, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. But where will we go? How will we survive? Jasmine placed her hand on her mother's, offering her a sense of calm in the midst of the storm. Daddy says you'll be okay. He says you've been strong enough to handle everything so far. You just have to trust him. You have to trust that it's time to go. Angela closed her eyes, her heart heavy with grief and fear, but also a profound sense of gratitude for the guidance George continued to provide. She realized that the money she had inherited from his passing wasn't just a blessing. It was a means to start over, to leave the past behind, and to protect her children from any more harm. Meanwhile, George, from the spirit world, continued to torment the killers and their accomplices. His presence was relentless, driving them to the brink of insanity. His spirit appeared before them, whipping them with the same fury he had unleashed on David. His whispers in their ears were unrelenting, forcing them to confront their sins. It didn't take long for the killer's wife and David to crack under the pressure, confessing to their horrific deeds. In the courtroom, their confessions echoed through the air, and the judge, though grim, ensured they were sentenced to life in prison. The system had finally caught up with them, thanks to George's unwavering spirit and the power of his love for his family. As for Angela and her children, they boarded a flight to the UK, determined to leave behind the haunting memories of their past. There, they began a fresh start. New opportunities, new friends, and a new life. They settled in a quiet town where Angela found peace, knowing she had done the best she could for her children. Although the pain of losing George would never completely fade, she now felt a sense of safety and hope for the future. And so, with justice served and the weight of years of anguish lifted, George's spirit finally rested. His family was safe, his killers were brought to justice, and the love that had transcended death had ensured they would carry on, strong and unbroken.